Hey everybody, welcome to the Cover 2 podcast, another Skype edition as we are staying at home and staying far away from each other. I'm Jared Smith.
I'm Nick Nenad.
Nick Nenad's a little slow today. It's okay. Might have just woken up from a nap, but it's all good. So today's show, we are going to talk about a couple different things. We're going to get into the NFL. There was some breaking news that just came down as far as the NFL playoffs is concerned. We also have a little more news on Tom Brady and what number he's going to be wearing for next
Yes.
year. Might surprise some, might not. We will see. The Olympics has officially set their date for 2021. So towards the end of the show, we will get into that and kind of talk about, how the athletes are, in a sense, preparing for that year off. But we do want to jump in to the NFL. Free agency, for the most part, has dried up. So this isn't going to be necessarily about the players. Most of the big name free agents and the big fish have already signed with teams. But some breaking news just came down this morning that the NFL is expanding their playoffs, and there will be 2 extra teams, 1 for each conference. Also, there will only be 1 team, which will be the number 1 overall seed, that will get a bye week. Every other team is playing on the first weekend of the playoffs. So, Nick, I want to jump right into it, man. Give me your initial thoughts on if you like the expanded playoffs and if you like having that extra team from now for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with this change at all, and I don't really think anybody should either, because what it
I
does is
do.
you do. Okay. Well, then that's going to be very interesting. I want to get your take. My thoughts on it are that because you still have 1 team getting a bye, I think this is okay. I think if they expanded it to 16 teams, much like the NBA and the NHL, I think then the regular season, there's not as much of an advantage of getting a better record and stuff like that. But this is the ultimate reason to get the best record in each conference, because you will be the only team with a game off in the first week of the playoffs. And also, the chances of you playing a worse team in your first playoff game is more applicable in this thing. So that gives even more of an advantage. And I'm all about the regular season meaning more. So I think that's the main thing I like about this. Hey, and here's another really cool thing that they announced at the very end of this press release, the NFL did, that we will now have 3 games, not just 2, on the first weekend of the NFL
Right.
playoffs. So that first
Right.
Saturday, 3 games instead of 2. And then again, Sunday, 3 games instead of 2. That's 6 NFL playoff games on the first playoff weekend. I'm super excited, Jared. I don't see any problem with this. So I'm really actually interested to see what your issue is.
Listen, from a fan standpoint, do I want to see more football? Yes, obviously, that is a given. So this isn't about wanting to see extra games. I would love to see the NFL play 62 games a year, right? Or
Yeah.
82 games like the NBA does.
Yep.
Obviously, that is like not possible. But I think you understand what I'm trying to say is, of course, I want to see more football. But when it comes to the playoffs, like you have to work to get into the playoffs, right? Now with this expanded playoffs, there's more potential for a 500 team, like an 8-8 team, or even a 7-9 team to get into the playoffs. And what I think this is doing is almost diluting the playoffs in a sense, and the great teams that are getting in, right? So maybe the competition kind of drops off a little bit, and I think that's my really only my one gripe to this. Yes, I want to see more football. But if you think about it, do I want to see a 7-9 team get into the playoffs? Right? Does a 7-9 team or even an 8-8 team really deserve to get in my opinion? No. Right? I think over the course of the year, take the Cowboys for last year, for instance. Not to say that they would have made it if there was the expanded playoffs last year, but they were an average team, right? And they would have had an even better chance of getting into the playoffs if we did have this expanded playoffs last year. The Cowboys didn't deserve to make the playoffs last year. I believe the 2 teams that would have gotten in would have been the Pittsburgh Steelers from the AFC and the Rams from the NFC.
Yes, you're
Now you
correct
can
on that.
argue that both of those teams, had up and down years. The Steelers started off horribly, and then they traded for Minka Fitzpatrick, and their season kind of turned around a little bit, even though they didn't have Big Ben, right? The Rams, it was like coming off that Super Bowl year last year, we were expecting them to no doubt be in the playoffs, and they obviously took a major dip. So I just don't want to see bad football in the playoffs. In the regular season, it's going to happen from time to time, but when you get in the playoffs, I want to see the best of the best, and I think this is only diluting that situation. So that is really my one and only gripe with this. Obviously, the NFL did this for money reasons, to get more teams in. Players are going to make more money from this. Coaches are going to make more money. And obviously, the owners are going to really benefit from this. So from a money standpoint, it's a no-brainer as to why they added these playoff games.
Yeah, because think about it, when we look at speaking about money, that you now have an extra channel getting another playoff game, whether it's CBS or NBC or Fox or ESPN potentially, or even another channel when they have a new TV deals come up. So maybe the NFL Network. But so the one interesting thing you said there was that it was going to be the Steelers and Rams last year that made it. Now, this is not going to happen every season, but just to give you kind of what that meant, the Steelers were 8-8, and they were the only 8-8 team. So them making the playoffs, they weren't tied with anybody. They weren't, by far worse than the 6th seed, the Tennessee Titans, who almost made the Super Bowl. And then when you look at the NFC, you had the Los Angeles Rams in the same situation. They were the only 9-7 team besides the Philadelphia Eagles, who of course made it because of the division winner. But in this case, the Eagles would have made the playoffs regardless, and it wouldn't have mattered necessarily the whole NFC East situation. So I do think there are a little bit more negatives to what your point is saying, that there is going to be worse teams in. But in a situation like last year where I think we spent 3 weeks in a row on this podcast complaining about the Eagles and Cowboys and how bad they were. If this situation would have happened last season, we wouldn't have complained at all, because they would have been the 7th seed and it wouldn't have been a big deal, and they would have been the only they wouldn't have tied anybody in their division win, wouldn't have meant that was the only reason they made the playoffs. So I think that's another positive here to look at in that sense. But I do get your point. Because I personally, I think, now I know you don't like bad football, but I mean, especially when I get a couple drinks in me, there is nothing worse than bad football for me. Any sport.
Well,
it's really bad.
This is like the only comparison that I can think of, and it's just one that literally popped into my head. When I think of bad football, I think of Thursday night football, right? So You're coming off of the game on Sunday. You have 3 days to prepare. When you ask the masses, the NFL players as a whole, the majority of them say it takes close to 5 days just to get their bodies ready for another game, right? Well, obviously, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that's not 5 days, right? And then you're expecting them to play at the highest level on a Thursday. So it's almost like I don't want to see these Thursday games that are bad now translating somewhat into these playoff games. Now, like I said, it's not a direct comparison, but yeah, I would prefer to see no football than bad football. I'm sorry. And if that means that we have one less playoff game, then you know what? So be it. The playoffs is you have to earn your right to get in. An 8-8 team or a 7-9 team, that is not earning your right to get in. You are an average team at best, which means like, yeah, you may have some good players. You may have a quarterback. You've probably had some injuries throughout the year, but you, in my opinion, did not do enough. You have to be above 500, right? More like double-digit wins. A 10-win team deserves to get in the playoffs. 8-win team, not so much.
Well, yeah, and I think you just mentioned a 10-win team. I think there have been cases in the past where rightful teams should have made the playoffs, but just based on what conference they were in, they didn't make it. I do think this shores up the idea that I can give you an example because I remember this personally. I believe it was 2014 or 13. The Arizona Cardinals went 10-6, and it was essentially a loss to the Saints in week 1 that didn't allow them to make the playoffs. They were the 7th seed, and they were 10-6. And I personally believe that team was very talented and could have easily won a playoff game, even being the 7th seed. So I do think, although there is going to be the years where we're going to have a 7-9 team, potentially even 6-10, because of the way the divisions work out.
Woo,
I remember
that is
awful. Well, because I believe
if a
it was
6-10 team ever gets in, that's pathetic.
I believe it was either 2013, 2014. Again, the Cardinals involved. They played a Carolina Panthers team that almost made the playoffs at six wins, and may have. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll look it up in a second just to make sure. But they were a 7-win team that made the playoffs and then ended up getting a home game, for God's sake, too.
Yeah,
so,
no, yeah. Mm-mm.
So that will happen, but I do think when you look at it from the standpoint of that deserving teams will make it if they are 10-6, if they're 11-5, which we've seen the potential that could even happen too. I do think that's a little bit more beneficial than the one time or the two times that a 7-9 or 8-8 team makes the playoffs. I think that year they'll probably get crushed in the first round anyway, so who cares at that point? And if they can win, then it's a whole other argument to talk about. One more thing I want to talk about on this topic was the fact that what this means, having 7 teams, is that every single team from a division can make the playoffs, which I personally love because this kind of goes back to my whole point I'm making.
Didn't think about that. Yeah.
If every single team from a division has a good enough record to make the playoffs, they should. In the past and in many other sports, that is not a possibility to happen. And I've always thought that's kind of a stupid rule, and that just because of geographically where they play, they're not allowed to make the playoffs, even if their record is not.
I mean, let's be honest right now. And I mentioned, I believe it was even on last week's podcast, the fact that your Arizona Cardinals in the NFC West, it is shaping up to be on paper one of the toughest, if not the toughest divisions in all of football, with the Cardinals getting a lot better with the trade of DeAndre Hopkins, the Rams, who are still a formidable team, just 2 years removed from the Super Bowl, the Seattle Seahawks that have Russell Wilson, and as long as they have him, they have a fighting chance, and the San Francisco 49ers coming off of a Super Bowl loss. So, a little biased there, but I get what you're saying. That NFC West is one division where I think they may have the best chance to get all 4 teams into the playoffs. And you're right, having that being never done before, it would be interesting to see. Usually what happens is because you play each division opponent twice a year, you kind of weed each other out. But you're right, because of this extra spot, it opens up that possibility.
Yeah, no, and last year there would have been 3 NFC West teams that would have made the playoffs. The Cardinals obviously not good enough record last year, but you're right. When you look at it this year, I can't imagine the Rams being an awful team this year. I can't imagine the Cardinals being an awful team this year either. I expect, well, of course. But I do expect personally the Seattle Seahawks and San Francisco 49ers to be playoff teams next year. So you look at that, I think you're right. My bias is showing heavily. But
it's okay. It's fine. You're allowed to do that every once in a while. Not all the time.
There's nothing I can do. Yeah. There's nothing I can do about us, getting DeAndre Hopkins. I can just get happy. That's all I can do.
You just have to accept it. It's like, oh man,
it's so annoying. It's so annoying that we have this good of a player that we have to show him off. It's embarrassing. It's not good. It's not good, Jared. But okay, enough of that. Let's switch topics a little bit. Really quickly, you did mention Tom Brady switching his number. Did you expect him
keeping his number?
You're right. I'm like, Jesus, that someone's going to take that clip and be like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
It's okay. That's why I'm here. I got your back.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Jared, did you expect him to switch his number though? Because I personally thought I did not. I didn't either. I didn't expect it either.
Listen, it doesn't matter what it takes. Look, for Chris Godwin, you know what he does? Or if I was him, I would walk up to Tom Brady, not walk up because social distancing, 6 feet apart. I would go 6 feet up to him.
Very good point.
And I would say, Tom Brady, 50 G's.
Ooh.
50 G's. Or something like that. You're not just going to give it away. Obviously, the brand that Tom Brady has built, TB12, all of that, that means something to him more than just actually wearing the number. This is a profitable number to him, right? On multiple facets. So it's not surprising to me at all that he got number 12. And just from the early reports, because this actually just came out this morning, I haven't heard of any compensation, or if Tom Brady is, paying Chris Godwin, or if he's donating something to one of his charities, or who knows. As of right now, this just looks like a straight up Chris Godwin gave away his number, and Chris Godwin is now going to wear number 14. So curious to see if there's any more details on this. Usually sometimes there's money involved, there's something like that. But yeah, I would go up to Tom Brady and I'd say, hey man, like I want a new car, I want something. Like, you know how much this means to you, so what are you willing to give up over here?
I would have asked for 6,000 rolls of toilet paper from Tom Brady. That's what I would ask.
I think Chris Godwin can afford his own toilet paper. I would go a little higher in my thinking, but
No.
I guess everyone has their own price. So if that's where you are, then okay, sure.
Realistically, I would have asked for 126,000 $126,000. And that's because the number 12 and the 6 championships Tom Brady's won. That's what I would ask for.
I was gonna say I got the 120, and then where did the other 1,000 come in? Okay, all right, I like it.
Tom, come on, that's not that much money. We just paid you like 18 million more than you have been the last couple of years. Fast enough.
Yeah. No. Tom's at least his contract, he's going to average around 30 million for the next 2 years. Plus, his wife makes about triple what he does on an annual basis. So. Not to say that is going to happen, but I'm almost certain that Tom Brady can afford to give away that type of cash to keep that number 12. So
that would be
not surprised. But we just did have to mention that for those of you who now want to go out and buy a Tampa Bay Bucks jersey, number 12 will have Brady on the back.
There you go. Yeah, that's a very good point. If you are a Buccaneers fan or you're just a Brady fan in general. 12 is going to be his number. So you can go out and buy that jersey, and it's not going to be fake or anything like that, like the ones I buy. Real quickly, one more topic. Do you believe that Tom Brady with Tampa Bay Buccaneers will still remain on the injury report every single week? Did you see that story that came out earlier this week and how Tom Brady essentially for the last couple of years has always been on the injury report as probable with a shoulder injury? Did you see that?
No, I didn't.
I didn't personally know that. Yeah, I guess, and they've kind of joked around with Bill Belichick in press conferences before the games, saying, "Is Tom Brady okay? Is he ready to go?" And then Bill Belichick's like, "We'll have to see by game," like stuff like that. So,
is that some just like kind of Jedi mind trick? Like, is that just Bill Belichick trying to?
Well, that's why exactly. That's why I'm asking. Do you think that kind of thing will remain with Tampa Bay?
So I could see that, because here's the thing. I think what Tom Brady is going to do is he's going to come in and he's not going to put his foot down and say, all right, we're putting in my offense. It's my way or the highway. I think he will collaborate with head coach Bruce Arians, and I think they will come together and they'll merge, right? Tom Brady will bring some of his knowledge and experience from New England over to Tampa, right? Whether it's a 2-minute situation and he says, okay, in this situation, I like to go up tempo and try to trick the defense, or whatever it is, right? Tom Brady is going to bring his experience over. So if that somehow gives the Bucs an upper hand, a benefit, having to keep the opponent on their toes. Listen, Tom Brady is going to play unless he tears his ACL, which, knock on wood, I hope he does not do that again, right? But other than that, he is a pretty tough guy, right? He's had a shoulder injury. He's had a foot injury before. So he's dealt with things. And honestly, going through a 16-game season, you can ask any NFL player, they have dealt with some type of injury, right? Now, there's a difference between playing hurt and actually being injured. Tom Brady has been able to play hurt. So him being on the injury report as probable doesn't really mean much to me. And I think if you're an opponent, it's like, okay, he's playing. So you're not going to have to go out to the field early during warmups and be like, oh my gosh, is Tom Brady out there? He's playing, unless it's something more serious, or unless you see a questionable tag, questionable meaning 50-50 that he will play or not. That would kind of get my attention a little more. But a probable designation being on the injury report, please. Tom Brady's playing, and you can take that to the bank.
Yeah, it is interesting. The injury report in the NFL does have a little weird quirkiness to it sometimes. I can remember most of the time during the last couple of seasons, Larry Fitzgerald being on the injury report, but that's simply because he missed a day of practice for a Veterans Day off. So I do think that the injury report sometimes doesn't really showcase the full injury report for a team. It's more of just technically if a guy misses practice, they're on the injury report. And I can remember almost every single week Corey Peters, Chandler Jones, and Larry Fitzgerald, and sometimes others not being on the injury report when they're fully healthy, essentially.
Well, listen, and sometimes it's just load management, right? When you're not 24, 25 anymore, Tom Brady's going to be damn near 42, 43 by the time the season starts.
Yeah.
So yes, load management will be a factor, whether it's resting his shoulder, making sure that his legs are ready to go every Sunday. So if he has to work a light day or take, not to say that he's going to take the practice off, but whatever is needed, you're going to do that and not necessarily worry about the designation on the injury report. That to me is meaningless at this point, unless he sustains a serious injury. So,
yeah, no, I agree. That's makes sense.
Good question, though, because I did not see that story, but I will have to look that up.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you because I hadn't heard that before either, and it was just kind of funny. And you wonder if Bruce Arians, who's kind of more no nonsense, will actually continue that kind of hokey stuff that the Patriots played and a lot of times worked.
If it helps you win games, and it's within the the legal part of the game, they're not doing anything illegal like deflating footballs or anything like that, then sure, go ahead, why not?
Well, they've never done any of that kind of stuff, have they?
Of course, no, never.
No. All right, let's move on to the NFL draft. And we're not going to do an NFL draft predictions podcast right now. We will do that down the line. One of our next couple podcasts will be that for sure, just for the sake of lack of content. But there was a big announcement earlier this week since we've done our last podcast, and that is the fact that the NFL draft will not be moving from its April 23rd through 25th dates. We did announce last week that the draft was moving from Las Vegas to essentially Skype or right. online, which was the right thing to do. There was literally no reason for it to be in Vegas anymore. But now, after a couple GMs complained, the NFL came out and said, well, no, just like free agency, the NFL draft will go on as planned. You don't necessarily need to be all in the same place to be able to draft, essentially. Jared, what is your take on this? Do you think it's the right thing for the NFL to do?
Yes, it is. For a multitude of reasons, I feel it's the right thing to do. Number one, with the lack of sports that is going on, right? Literally nothing is going on right now. The NFL has an opportunity with how big the NFL draft is normally, right? Yeah. To basically take center stage. Everyone's at home. It's going to be in prime time. The TV ratings will be through the roof, right? Obviously, you won't have people technically there, but everyone will be watching on TV. So it is an opportunity for the NFL to take center stage, not only in the United States, but around the world. Number two, I'm very curious as to why these general managers were so skeptical, about the draft, taking place on its due date and wanting to have it pushed back. Now, when you're looking at a player who has a medical history like Tua, for instance, yes, you would like to see that person do on-field drills and have your own staff do a medical evaluation for that player. So from that perspective, yes, there are certain things that teams will not be able to get out of a player. But you still have their entire collegiate tape. You still have the NFL draft. You have the Senior Bowl if they were eligible for that, right? You can still have Skype interviews or over the phone interviews. So it's not like teams have zero access to these players. And really what I think this is going to do is this is going to weed out the good general managers versus the not good general managers, right? And the good scouting departments versus the bad scouting departments, because this is really going to see, okay, how good is your scouting department, right? How well can they evaluate these players by just their game tape and just the NFL Combine, right? You can't sit here and have one-on-one interviews and individual workouts anymore. So I think we will really see how good these teams are with their scouting departments. But in the end, these teams have had multiple months to go through the thousands of players that have elected to go into the draft, and I don't really think there's any excuse as to why teams should not and will not be prepared for this.
Yeah, I actually really like that take, Jared. I didn't think you were going to have that take because I can almost completely agree with everything you said. I think it's more of the GMs and the owners trying to kind of take control of the NFL in some ways, and I don't think that's necessary right now. I don't even necessarily care about the fact that it's for TV ratings and for the sake of us fans watching. I actually think this now poses the opportunity for us to be even more nervous about our draft picks, because we know that not all of the actual proper stuff has been done to these players. So it's more of a wild card, almost every single guy that gets picked, or at least the guys that we've heard about, injuries since the combine. I remember Jeff Okudah had some incident at the NFL draft that now a lot of teams I don't think are going to be able to properly check out. Teams like the Detroit Lions, Carolina Panthers that need corners and stuff like that. I think that's the type of guy. And of course, you mentioned Tua. Yeah, there was a positive medical review, and that's what's been having me say that I think Tua should be considered number one. But you don't have the full. Yeah, and it's not like Tua has only had one injury. So there is a lot to look over. So I do think for the fans' sake, I think at least me, I'll be a lot more nervous with whoever the Cardinals pick, because I have no idea who we're picking now. Now that we got, DeAndre Hopkins, which I'll mention again in every single podcast that we do from here on out. But I actually agree with you. I don't really have much to disagree with on that take. And I do think that it's nice for the fans that we do get to see this in 3 weeks. It's nice for our podcast that we'll be able to fill some content here for the next couple of weeks predicting this draft. And I do believe it's not that big of a deal that we're doing this over Skype, because we've seen many entities be doing stuff over the internet, over Skype. We've been seeing TV shows entirely via Skype. So why can't the NFL draft do it?
They can. And you brought up another good point that is along the lines of a player that has medical injuries. If they have off the field issues, if they've been in trouble with the law, a lot of times teams want to sit down in person, right, and see what the other person, see what that athlete has to say, see how well they handle themselves. So you can still do those things over Skype. Obviously, it'd be better to do that in person. But like I said, it's not like these general managers have zero contact with these players, and it's like, oh, they're just picking a player out of a hat. That's not the case. So like I said, you've had months. You've usually scouted these players for 2 or 3 years, because as a collegiate athlete, you can't declare for the NFL draft until you're at least a junior academically, right? So 3, more than likely 4 years of playing, that is enough tape, right? If you can't tell if a player is good or not off of their tape and the NFL combine and the early interviews that you have done with a player, then I'm sorry. Number one, you shouldn't be a scout or a general manager, and you have no business in that field.
Yeah, no, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I've always been amazed at how much complaining there is with a lot of these higher ups that get paid so much money to do this job.
That's the thing. You guys are getting these guys are getting paid millions of dollars. I do not want to hear it. No, and they're still getting their full salaries during this quarantine, right? During this, it's not like their salaries are being reduced or anything like that. So no, I do not want to hear it. Go do your jobs, evaluate, and trust your scouts, trust the other people that you are paying to do their jobs.
Yeah, because I think personally too, once the draft combine has happened, essentially the scouting is done. I mean, realistically, you're not truly scouting their on-field performance anymore. If you really can't decide between which quarterback you want to take or which offensive lineman or which linebacker, you're probably going to make the right choice anyways, because it's that close. If there's one guy with character issues and there's another guy that's not, that's where it could come into play. But again, call him on the phone, Skype him. What are they going to lie over Skype? Like, they still have to answer the questions you ask them.
I mean, they could technically lie.
But then they would probably lie in person as well. At that point, if you do a job interview over Skype or in person, mostly you're going to say the same exact things, right? It's not that much different. I've done both, so I personally know that I treated them both the same. I feel like these players could treat it the same as well. And I've already also seen this too. Like, I saw a report the other day that Isaiah Simmons, who's been probably the one player that's been really moving up the draft boards since the college football season.
Linebacker from Syracuse that can kind of do a little bit of everything. Right.
Yeah, and so I heard that, there's the potential that he's the number 2 pick or the number 1 pick now. If that's still happening, then clearly this issue of the draft happening in 3 weeks, I personally think is just another reason why this can happen. If we're already deciding that Simmons now, after essentially showing nothing but a good 40 time, is now better than Chase Young, who we've been looking at for the last 2 years, is one of the top players coming into the NFL, then I think we'll be fine. Like I think we're good. I really hope Isaiah Simmons drops to the Cardinals, man. That'd be insane. That would be
not
insane.
going to happen. Wishful thinking, but not going to happen. Listen, if you're the Cardinals, take an offensive tackle, right? Protect Kyler Murray's blind side and go from there, right? Yeah. Unless someone falls, I like I said, wishful thinking. I don't see it happening, but do the safe thing right now and take an offensive tackle, shore up your offensive line, help out your quarterback.
Exactly. And we will talk about more of our draft analysis. We'll probably do 2 weeks of draft analysis coming up next couple weeks. So we'll get into all that later. Let's switch topics. We're about halfway through the podcast here. We're going to switch topics away from the NFL here and talk about the college ranks. And so obviously, as we all know, March Madness and many other winter sports were kind of either interrupted or canceled because of this coronavirus pandemic. In turn, now that we've extended guidelines, the government has extended guidelines essentially till May for social distancing, we're not going to have any spring sports either. And I believe the NCAA already announced that the seasons were over for everybody else. Well, coming out, it was, I can't remember exactly, it was either yesterday or earlier today. We're talking on March 30th or 31st today. So if you're looking at the dates, that's when we heard this news, that the NCAA was going to allow eligibility for seniors for spring sports because
like an extra year of eligibility.
An extra year. So a senior that normally wouldn't have been able to do a 5th year, hadn't redshirted or anything like that, will now be able to play next year. Sports like baseball, lacrosse, and many others will now essentially be unaffected. If these players do want to go to the next level, they can do that. But if they don't, they can just stay. And they're legally allowed to do that. And essentially, they'll be able to play their senior season. Personally, Jared, just to get my take out of the way, I think this is great. I think it's very, very smart that the NCAA did this. It would have been terrible if they didn't allow that because there was nothing really these players could do, and there is no reason why they shouldn't get another year of eligibility. So I think this is great, and I'm gonna be happy to hear the stories in the next couple of years of the guys that did get that extra year of eligibility, and it helped them make a professional sport and stuff like that. So I think there's nothing but good from this. I do want to get your take, because we did talk about this a little bit before the podcast, at the fact that winter sports are not going to get this same eligibility requirement. What is your take on that? And do you believe that winter sports should be able to get that eligibility as well?
Right. Well, first of all, I think you're giving the NCAA way too much credit here. Like, this is a no-brainer. You don't have to be smart to understand.
Well, Jared, there's not smart a lot,
for mostly spring athletes who did not get to participate in sports at all, or maybe like the first week or two of their season. Yes, of course, it is. You don't have to be a genius to figure out, yes, we need to give those athletes a 5th year, an extended year of eligibility, if they so choose, like you mentioned, to continue their collegiate career. I think we may disagree a little bit as far as the winter sports go, and mainly, basketball players, men and women's March Madness. That is even if you're not a sports fan or a basketball fan, I know so many people that still get involved in March Madness because it's just so fun to watch. You love seeing the underdog stories. So it's a little disappointing that those athletes won't be able to participate in another March Madness. Those seniors, they did, for the most part, get to play their entire senior seasons. So I guess I can see why the NCAA was not as lenient with them as they were with the spring athletes. But it's still, and you did bring up a good point in saying that this really only affects the seniors that were going to make it to March Madness, because if you played on a team that wasn't eligible for March Madness or a postseason tournament and your season was over, then it's kind of like, okay, do we really need to give that athlete another chance? Now, like I said, who knows? Maybe next year they have a better team, they get a better roster, all that stuff. I would have liked to see the NCAA give the winter sports or winter athletes an extra year as well. But like going back to the springtime sports, yeah, this is a no-brainer. So you're giving the NCAA way too much credit. And the NCAA, for once and really one of the only times that I can ever think of actually looks good in this scenario. They weren't just money grabbers, or this wasn't just all about their bottom line. This was actually about their players, and affecting their collegiate careers for the next year.
Yeah, I think in what you're talking about, we didn't talk about this on the podcast, but what I said before we started was that the issue with the winter sports and giving them eligibility is because there were teams that were eliminated from March Madness. Not everybody, like the ACC tournament hadn't been finished. The Pac-12 tournament didn't start. The Big West tournament,
yeah, right.
Many
Most
tournaments,
of those tournaments didn't even start.
No, so but in turn, there also were tournaments that had finished. So to grant eligibility to every single Division I team, essentially you're giving players that already had their careers had ended, rightfully so, you're giving them another chance for no reason. So I understand at least why the NCAA couldn't do that, because in speaking of fairness, that's not fair that those players that already were eliminated from any sport, not even March Madness, and that their seasons had ended and they'd cried into their teammates' shoulders, for them to get a fifth year because, of the coronavirus is not necessarily fair. So I saw that as really the main issue, and something that's almost impossible to go on with. So, but yeah, I guess I'm giving the NCAA credit. I don't want to. I don't like to. I think they're a terrible organization. I really hope
you're just too nice of a person. I don't know what to tell you. It's really not, right? Any sane person would have done that without hesitation, and it wouldn't have taken this long too. Like, why did the NCAA have to come out and do this now, right? I mean, immediately when the president put on this quarantine and basically told everyone to stay home, right? And the moment the NCAA canceled all of spring sports, their next statement should have been, we are going to grant these players eligibility. The fact that it's had to take like a month or however long it's been is, I don't know, maybe I really can't stand the NCAA if you could not tell. So, dire situations and dire circumstances, will I give them credit? I will take every opportunity to not give the NCAA credit.
And Jared, you're so right for doing that too, because I mean, we could have a whole podcast, and maybe we'll have to, just because of lack of content, discussing what we believe about players getting paid and the monopoly that the NCAA is. I personally hope that one day in the future, the NCAA does run out of business, and that there is a new entity that takes over college sports and gives players what they rightfully deserve, especially football and basketball players.
Right. And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But another, instance of the NCAA being greedy and or not really caring about what these athletes are doing. Trevor Lawrence, the all-star, quarterback for Clemson, who more than likely will be the first overall pick in next year's NFL draft. Him and his girlfriend, they started I believe, I'm not sure if it was a GoFundMe account, but some type of like sponsorship program for families in the South Carolina area or around Clemson who needed help with money during these trying times, right? Well, guess what? The NCAA came out the first day that Trevor Lawrence and his girlfriend started this, and they basically shut it down. They said, you guys cannot do this because it is against the NCAA rules. Basically, there was so much backlash, right, against the NCAA and people that were supporting Trevor Lawrence and his girlfriend, that the NCAA had no choice but to come out and say, oh, you know what? It's actually okay. You guys can go ahead, with your sponsorships and looking to, generate money for the community, right? So, but it's just like, it's little things like that that make me so hesitant, not hesitant, but make me not like the NCAA. It's like, was Trevor Lawrence doing anything wrong, right? He was not trying to make a profit for himself, for any of his teammates, for his girlfriend. This wasn't about him. This was about trying to help the community in these trying times. And the fact that the NCAA comes in and kind of ex-nays it in the beginning is just another example of how I can't say it here.
Oh, I know what you're trying to say.
Right, but just how wrong the NCAA is.
Yeah, you just pissed me off again about the NCAA and all that stuff.
Good.
I took
I'm
back.
glad.
All that stuff I just said earlier. I almost take back any of it. But You know what's so stupid about that too, Jared, is that, we talk about, and here's what the charity was. I have it pulled up right here. It was a GoFundMe page to raise money for two charities, Meals on Wheels and No Kid Hungry. So
Yeah.
not only are
Like,
those,
what is wrong with that? Why does the NCAA need to even come in and interfere in the first place?
well, and here's the other thing too. Don't all of us, when we're applying to college, have to show our charitable work, right? So then all of a sudden we get to college and we can't do charitable work because it might interfere with what? This is the kind of thing, right? Like it just,
No, you know why? It's because
know.
Trevor Lawrence has such a bad history, and he was going to take all that money and use it for
That's true.
himself.
That's
Clearly,
true.
that's
Yeah.
clearly what it
Because,
was. The NCAA has,
yeah.
you know.
Well, because you remember, he was the guy handing out $100 bills to all the players after the NCAA championship, right? Remember,
Oh,
he
of
was
course.
that guy. Yeah.
Of course.
So, whatever happened to that?
For those of you that don't know, we're getting off the rails a little bit, but we are mocking the NCAA as much as we can. And I have no hard feelings about it.
By the way, Jared, whatever happened to Odell Beckham Jr. giving all those players money? Like, why did none of the LSU players get in trouble? See, this is where we can even talk about this. Why is Trevor Lawrence getting in trouble for this? And those LSU guys who kept the money, why didn't they get in trouble for it?
I don't know. I did hear that at least one of the LSU players did donate that money to a local charity. So
Isn't that the same thing? That's the same thing.
Right. Yeah,
Enough of this. Enough talking about the NCAA. I'm just gonna get mad, and it's not. We're having a good podcast here. So, okay, let's switch topics. Our final topic of the day: the 2020 Olympics are now going to become the 2021 Olympics officially. Last week on the podcast, we announced that the Olympics were being postponed for the first time in forever. And they have now announced a date. It is going to the 2020 Tokyo Olympics will technically now start on 21st, 2021. So they're essentially giving the athletes more than a year's notice of what is going on. I think, one of the biggest concerns coming out of this postponement of the Olympics is the fact that athletes had specifically trained for this upcoming August. And a lot of times it's hard to go back on that and tell a person, well, by the way, even though you qualified, you're now going to have to wait another year. So you're still going to have to train and you're going to have to risk injury. I do think now that they've announced the date so quickly, literally less than a week after they made the announcement of the postponement, I do think now athletes will properly be able to kind of restart. And I do believe that anybody that was you're concerned about age, or you're concerned about depletion, or maybe you were afraid you weren't going to make the trials for it. I think this gives everybody a chance. It's not being moved 3 years or 4 years. They're not canceling it and moving it to 2024. They are just moving it a year. Again, a lot like what I said about the NCAA, unfortunately, I do think there's mostly positives to this in a situation that it doesn't have a lot of positives in it. I do think this is the right decision by the IOC, another organization that doesn't a lot of times make the right decisions. I do believe they made the right decision here.
Yeah, no, they did. And I'm glad that there is a set date, right? Because for a week or two, there was a lot of gray areas. Okay, they're looking to, extend it a year, but there wasn't any certainty. So if you're an athlete, you're kind of just sitting in limbo. Like, okay, I've been training. I've gotten my body in shape. I'm ready, right? For the last 3.5 years, this has been their one and only focus. And now this is being extended another whole year. But at least now there's a date of, okay, here is my end date. This is where I need to be. So maybe, you know what? Maybe they take some time off. Maybe they go and clear their heads and kind of get their minds right? Because it's more than just the physicality as an athlete. It's also very much a mental game. It doesn't matter the sport that you're playing. So it was very interesting that I was reading an article that said that for the combined Olympic organizations that basically put on these Olympics, no matter what city or what country it's in, there's going to be close to like $120 million in revenues lost, which is completely absurd. So all the organizations and people that work to get these games up and running, that are working before, during, and after these events, are losing a lot of money. Organizations have had to completely shut down and or deplete their staff, just like small businesses here have had to do the same thing. So a major negative effect has taken place not only on the athletes but also the people that are working to put this Olympics on. So just wanted to mention them as well, that they are, it's not just the athletes that are losing something, it's also the people that are working.
No, I'm glad you brought that up too. I was just literally reading an article right now as you were talking about that, and how there's over 80,000 volunteers. So the people that actually work at the Olympics, most of them aren't getting paid apparently. So technically, it's not like the issue that the NBA and NHL had, and a lot of MLB stadiums are going to have, where the employees that worked at those arenas and stadiums essentially need to get paid because they're getting screwed way more than a lot of the athletes are, because their jobs depend on concerts and sports. So a lot of players have come out and given money and essentially are paying those people salaries, which is an awesome thing. And it's the right thing to do. There's no reason why those people shouldn't get paid. And I really honestly wish a lot of other companies would do that for their workers as well. But in the big business that sports is, players can hand over $200,000 and it's not the biggest deal a lot. Yeah, you mentioned also that there was going to be, would you say, $100+ million loss? Yeah, the Olympics as a whole is a $28 billion thing. That's how big this is. There's over 11,000 athletes that are involved in this. Let me see. There was one more stat I wanted to say.
Wow.
And more than 200 countries that go into this. So almost the 28 billion almost sounds like a little less than you'd expect for the amount of money that's going into this. So it's good. Tokyo will have a full year also to deal with any of this coronavirus pandemic as well. It would have been extremely hard for them. Imagine if they had an outbreak in the middle of the Olympics, right?
Nope.
Because of how close they are to South Korea and China, which have been two of the biggest countries involved in this pandemic. I'm still shocked that nothing essentially has happened in Japan. And it was, I think it's the only reason why they were even thought about continuing this. I was wrong on one thing. The scheduled start is July 24th, not July 21st. Just wanted to make that little change.
July 24th.
And another good thing about this too, and we talked about this on last podcast too, and how when we wanted them to move this, we did want them to move this date to something that wouldn't interfere with football season or basketball season or hockey season, because NHL and NBA have their playoffs normally in the fall and summer going into early June, and the NFL doesn't really start up till early August, and the season doesn't start till September normally. So them moving it from July 24th to August 9th, once again, doesn't really get involved in all of those sports, and just is kind of in the middle of baseball season. Yeah, so a very, very good decision by the IOC, and it was smart of them to just move it. And again, we're talking about the NCAA or a little bit earlier. How come the IOC made this decision in less than a week, and the NCAA took a month, maybe even more than that, to make the decision? Just another reason to kind of SHIT on the NCAA.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah.
One more. I was actually also reading that I don't know if this was passed in the $2 trillion relief package that President Trump signed on Friday, but the USOPC, they sent a letter to Congress asking for $200 million to be included in that $2 trillion package, which would go to helping some of the athletes, maybe that are underpaid. And then that would help at least, this is saying 4,500 full-time employees that work to help make the Olympics go on. So hopefully, if not 200 million, at least there is some type of revenue being generated that can go to these employees and to these athletes that really depend on these Olympics, right? This is their full-time job. So hopefully there's something for them as well.
Oh, no, I totally agree. Again, and like I was saying, although the Olympics necessarily is a volunteered kind of thing, the people that are behind the U.S. Olympics, there are people getting paid, and this is going to affect them. I kind of compare it a little bit to fighting, where in both boxing and UFC, a training camp, you don't get paid for that. So a lot of times when stuff gets moved, you're losing money, and a second training camp does cost a lot for the athletes that aren't making the big bucks. So I do compare it a little bit to what's going on with like the UFC and professional boxing, at least at the lower ranks, where these guys, it's hard for them, and it's a little bit somewhat understandable why the UFC wants to continue their fights, because they know that it does affect players financially, not players, fighters, when these training camps get canceled. Almost the same thing is going on with the Olympics as well. So it would be nice if the U.S. had included that in, or at least just helps them out in the meantime. With how much money they're throwing around, I can't imagine $200 million to compete in the U.S. Olympics is that big of a deal. One more thing, we do have a little bit extra time. Jared, how excited are you that the Michael Jordan documentary has been moved to April 19th? It originally was slated to happen in the summer, and now literally because of the coronavirus, we are now getting 2 episodes per week starting April 19th.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little disappointed. Like, I thought originally they were just going to bring everything out at once, and we would just be able to kind of roll through all 10 episodes. I understand they want to keep people on their toes, so 2 episodes a week. Okay, but no, I'm so happy. I've seen the full 3-minute trailer, and even though I was a very young kid when all this was going on, it's like, this is Michael Jordan. This is the amount of players and reporters and coaches and people that were involved in that time that will be interviewed. I was easily over 100 people that were being interviewed. So all the insights that you will get to see, Michael Jordan's last year with the Bulls, winning his championship before he retired. Just I can't wait, man. Listen, I love Netflix, right? I'm watching Game of Thrones right now. So I've got some shows to watch, but I'm getting a little burnt out on TV shows. So I love the 30 for 30s, and I can't wait to see this. I wish that they could just release it right now. I'm not sure if they're still actually editing and putting it together. I'm sure if not, it's almost done. But yeah, no, I'm happy that they moved that up. So that at least there's something to look forward to.
Yeah, that week's going to be fun too. I mean, potentially you have UFC 249 that Saturday. The next day, Michael Jordan documentary, and then the next weekend, the NFL draft. So we do have some stuff to look forward to coming in, and then obviously after the Michael Jordan documentary is released, it will happen for the next month after that too, going up all the way almost into June. So yeah, I'm super excited. Like you mentioned, you were very young. I never saw any of the Michael Jordan stuff. I remember his last season with the Wizards. I remember asking my dad if we could go to a game when they played the Lakers or Clippers. And I don't remember the reason, but my dad told me a reason why we couldn't go watch the game, probably because it costed a lot of money. But
probably not.
I did recognize as a young sports fan what it meant to potentially go see Michael Jordan. So I'm excited to even learn more about the man. I've heard about his baseball stint. I watched Space Jam when I was a kid. I've seen a lot of the documentaries that have surrounded teams playing the Bulls, like the Bad Boys, like the Lakers, the Celtics, all those teams. So I've never really seen the full scope of the actual Bulls dynasty. So I'm really interested, just as a sports fan, to learn more about that. I really don't know much about that besides my parents have told me. My mom ran into Michael Jordan in an elevator once in Arizona, and it's essentially she did. She said right when he got off on the next floor and got chased by a bunch of female fans right after.
Geez.
She by the way,
did she get his autograph or something? Or did she talk to him? Or
no? Here's the thing. He got ran off. But also Scottie Pippen and Phil Jackson were also in the elevator as well. Yeah.
Mom was in the elevator with Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Phil Jackson.
And she was born in Illinois. So
what?
Yeah.
Wait. Was she a Bulls fan though? Was she into the Bulls, or was it just like?
Well, yeah. My mom's never been the biggest sports fan. My dad is the reason I'm like this, to be honest. Okay. But yeah, she was. I do have an old Bulls hat. We do have weird Bulls paraphernalia around the house occasionally, and a lot of my aunts and uncles who were a little bit older than my mom living in Illinois. She didn't live there for that long, but they're big Bulls fans. They're big Bears fans, and a lot of times when the Bears and Cardinals play, there is somewhat of a rivalry between and the rest of my family.
That's kind of cool.
There is
All
some
right,
Chicago, there is some Chicago roots, but not necessarily. And I think if it was any other of my mom's sisters that ran into them,
they would have been involved in chasing Jordan down.
110%. Yeah. So just another reason for me to get excited, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm glad that ESPN decision to move that down, because like you're saying, they may have some editing. They may have some stuff that they need to add, but they told the filmmakers, hey, you guys got 2 weeks. You got 2 more weeks. You don't have 2 more months. You guys understand what's happening. Let's get it done. So I'm beyond excited, maybe even more potentially than the NFL draft for that documentary coming out early.
I don't know about all that, but yeah, no, I'm excited.
I'll regret saying that for sure.
If we do get UFC and then the premiere of this documentary, and then the following week we get the NFL draft, there's at least, new information as far as sports in the sports world to come out that we can talk about. And listen, they've been showing on ESPN and multiple other platforms a lot of different replays of games and, the best games of the decade or all that stuff, which is really cool. But it's, I'm ready to see some live action and the live sports entertainment to come back.
It's funny you mentioned live entertainment. The other day I was so bored. I watched an old 1996 Knicks Bulls playoff game at MSG, and I was enthralled. There was no rules back then. Charles Oakley's just running around bumping into people. MJ, I'll say this: it was one of the games where he scored 40+ points. Man, does he miss a lot of shots. That man shoots a lot of bad shots if you go back and look at it.
Listen, when you're Michael Jordan, you can do whatever the hell you want. I don't care if you miss 10 in a row.
I know. It
reminded the ultimate green light.
It reminded me a lot of Kobe. That's what it reminded me of the fact that when you look back, you see all the great shots, but when you watch a specific game, it's like, man, he's shooting a lot. Like, what is going on? Nobody else gets the ball. So very, very interesting. Let's end off the podcast there. Well, next week, potentially, we have a good colleague of ours, Alex Silva, on the podcast. We will announce that if that's possibly happening. And, get ready for some NFL draft talk. We'll obviously bring you the biggest news coming up in the next couple weeks. And we'll be talking about, any new developments in this coronavirus postponement of sports. We'll bring it all to you. We'll be here every single week, barring ridiculous circumstances here, not being able to get on. But for Nick Nenad,
I'm Jared Smith.
This has been the Cover 2 Podcast. We'll see you guys next week.
See you guys.